Okay, Chairman, we're now live.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a virtual meeting of the Licensing Committee at the London Borough of Hillingdon. This virtual meeting is also being broadcast simultaneously on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. The purpose of this committee is to receive and consider reports that relate to the licensing functions of the Council. The committee does not determine individual applications, which are instead undertaken by smaller licensing subcommittees. My name is Councillor Martin Goddard, and I'm the chairman of this meeting. Before we start, some important online housekeeping for everyone present, please. Please ensure that mobile phones around you are on silent. Please keep your microphone muted when not speaking, and then unmute to speak. As chairman, I will call on those to speak during the meeting. In terms of technical meeting control, if any councillor leaves the virtual meeting partway through for a period of time, for example, for a lost connection, I will continue the meeting unless we are not quorate, which is 3 councillors. Before we move on to the agenda, I'd like to call a roll call of those present. So please confirm your attendance when I call your name. Councillor Nick Dennis, I believe Nick, you've arrived. Great.
I am here, yes, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Lynn Allen.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Simon Arnold.
Good morning, Chairman. I'm present.
Thank you very much. Councillor Janet Gardner.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Eddie Lavery.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Carol Melvin.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor John Oswell. Did see Councillor Oswell before, but we appear to have lost him. Perhaps we'll come back to that then, Mark. Councillor Colleen Sullivan. Councillor Sullivan. Okay. Councillor Alan Chapman.
Morning, Chairman. Yes, I'm present.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the officer team supporting this meeting, please also confirm your presence. Stephanie Waterford, Service Manager for Licensing, Food and Safety Regulation.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Daniel Ferrer, Licensing Team Manager.
Good morning, Chairman. Present.
Thank you very much. Glenn Egan, Office Managing Partner from Legal Services.
Present, Chairman. Can I just add, I've got a precarious connection this morning, so if it gets difficult, I'll dial into the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, well, you're sounding good so far, Glenn. So,
okay. Hopefully that's a good omen. Thank you.
Thank you. Kieran Sayan, Senior Trading Standards Officer.
I'm present.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark Braddock, Democratic Services.
Present, Chairman.
Okay, so we just track back briefly. I believe we were missing.
Councillors Sullivan and Councillor Oswell, Chairman. They don't appear to have come back into the room yet, but the meeting is quorate, so you can continue.
So we will continue.
Yep.
Okay, so moving then on to the agenda. Firstly, any apologies for absence, please, Mark?
No, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any declarations of interest in the matters before this meeting? I will take it there are none unless I see any indications. No, I'm not seeing anything. Thank you. We have 2 sets of minutes to agree. First of all, the minutes of the meeting, which was held on the 14th of January. And I shall take those agreed unless I see any indications to the contrary. I'm seeing some nodding heads, which probably is good. Thank you. And then also there was a short meeting held on the 14th of May. The minutes of that meeting, again, so all looks good. Okay, so the next item is to just inform everyone that the agenda is divided into 2 parts. Part 1 will be considered in public, and part 2 will be considered in private. So the live feed will be cut at the conclusion of part 1. Okay, so moving to items in the agenda, the first item is a presentation by Trading Standards, and it's in effect an account of a visit to a set of licensed premises. So Kieran, please, can I turn that over to you? Thank you.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name's Kieran San. I am, and I'm representing Trading Standards Service. This talk is to give a general overview of how we conduct our visits to off-licensed premises following interest that was expressed in previous review meetings to gain a better understanding of what it is that we do. Mark, can we go on to the next slide, please? Thank you. We as a service are intelligence led. We receive complaints on throughout the year, and they come from various different people. They come from residents, parents of children who may have bought underage sales, other businesses, rival businesses complaining on competitors who are not complying with the law. We get complaints from councillors, other officers in Civic Centre who may have gone out and observed things happening that shouldn't be happening. We also get intelligence from the police where it's things that they've flagged up in their remit and they're things that may overlap into our remit as trading standards. When we receive this information on these businesses, they're added onto our list and then they're actioned on planned action days. They will get visited. The types of complaints we get can cover issues with underage sales, proxy sales where adults are buying on behalf of children, allegations of counterfeit, so fake or non-duty alcohol and or tobacco being sold. Mark, can we go on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So what happens on a visit? When we go out on visits, we sometimes, there's a list of different services listed up there. Some of them have accompanied us in the past, not on every visit, but if we can work with other agencies that overlap on areas of legislation, it helps us to action all aspects of the visit in one go. So we always take a tobacco detection dog unit with us, and there's a photo of some of the dogs and the individual dog handler that comes out with us. And they help in identifying concealments of tobacco. There are visits in the past where we've had officers from the Met Police come with us. We've had the licensing service officers come with us so they can look at issues covering compliance with the Licensing Act, compliance with the actual premises license that's been issued to the trader. We also have in the past occasionally taken customs with us when we know we're going to have significant quantities of non-duty paid goods, because that's predominantly customs remit. We do also, where we can, take brand representatives because they are more aware of the things to look out for when it comes to counterfeit goods, and they'll help us in identifying the correct products. Mark, if you can go on to the next slide, please. These are the type of things that we tend to find and what we kind of look for. So the main things that we tend to look for are alcohol and tobacco. So I've got some photos there just to give you an idea of the kind of things that we have found in the past. So with alcohol, we have issues with, you can get counterfeit bottles of alcohol, you can get non-duty paid. Within the borough predominantly, what we tend to find is non-duty paid. In the time that I've worked here, in the 6 years that I've been in the council, I've not come across any counterfeit alcohol. That's not to say that it may not exist, but we've never come across any. It predominantly tends to be non-duty paid. Excuse me. And what you can see in those pictures are examples of spirit bottles where the back labels have been changed. So it's a common occurrence where they remove the back label and they apply a fake stamp, a counterfeit stamp at the back, to basically show that the duty has been paid, to make it look legitimate. Most of the alcohol tends to be out on open display on shelves to legitimize its sale, and we inspect those bottles and check that they are compliant. We also come across issues with tobacco. Tobacco generally, by the nature of the way that it's sold now, is required to be behind a tobacco gantry, so it's not out on open display anyway. But what you'll have is you'll have additional concealments of tobacco, and I'll show you in the photos that follow the kind of concealments that we've found in the past. So when we come to tobacco, we'll find cigarettes, hand rolling tobacco, smokeless tobacco, oral tobacco, And with tobacco, we have issues with counterfeit, non-duty paid, it's being not in non-standardized packaging, or it being with the incorrect labeling and warnings. And that's kind of like the pictorial warnings. So if you can see there, it says smoking causes 9 out of 10 lung cancers. The specific guidance in legislation in terms of the pictorial warning and the written wording that must accompany it. Just to give you an indication, and that also there is an example of a standardized pack, and that's actually a counterfeit standardized pack. Just to give you an idea of what you're looking for. If we go on to the next slide, please, Mark, can show you some of the other things that we come across when we're out on our visits. So nitrous oxide canisters, which is known as laughing gas, is a psychoactive substance. It does have a legal use as a cream charger, but if a trader is knowingly selling it for it to be used illegally, the seller can face an unlimited fine or imprisonment of up to 7 years. This is enforceable by the police, but it's something that if we come across, we do action it and we do flag it up with our colleagues in the police service. We've also in the past come across medicinal products such as Viagra, which is only available, it can be available through pharmacists, but definitely not through your corner shop. And the photo below is of tramadol, which we've come across before as well. It's a prescription only painkiller. It's also classed as a Class C prescription drug, and that could lead to enforcement action by the police. There's also recently been an increase in the level of counterfeit stamps being sold by traders. So there is a lot of other things that we do come across, and when we do come across them, we will action it. We don't like to leave things if they're illicit. They may not be further actionable by us as a service, but they will get passed on to the relevant service to take further action where applicable. If you can go on to the next slide, please, Mark. Thank you. So this is just a very small snapshot of some of the paperwork that we issue. It's not the full documents, but just to give you an idea, when we enter a premise, each premise will receive a notice of powers and rights, which is on the left-hand side of your screen. And that's given to them on entry to the premises. So it informs them of what our powers are to conduct the visit and what their legal rights are. We don't give advance notice of our visits because it would defeat the purpose of inspection, because if they know we're coming, they can further conceal or remove infringing items from their premises. On the right-hand side, we've got a little snippet of a seizure notice, which will get issued when we have identified goods that are going to be seized. We would fill the seizure notice in, and so the trader will get copies of the paperwork at the close of the visit. If we go on to the next couple of slides, Mark, I'm just going to explain give some just some pictures of examples of some of the things that we kind of see and how they are kept on the premises, just so you get an idea when we're out and about. These are some of the many premises that we've been to. So it's not the most exciting photo, but that is basically a bag of tobacco hidden on a top shelf in amongst some other rubbish at the top. It's kind of done like that and wrapped in plastic bags to make it look like it's not relevant, or it doesn't have anything that we would be interested in. If you go into the next photo, Mark, please. Thank you. This is in another off license. On the bottom shelving, there are boxes that will be boxes for maybe crisps or other food items, but inside them they contain tobacco, and they'll be identified because the sniffer dogs can sniff them out. If you carry on to the next photo, that's one of the sniffer dogs there in action, and what she's found is a box. So this happens quite often. They'll have boxes that are for bottles. So the one in the main picture is for Hennessy, and then you've got other two on the right hand corner. You've got another photo, and in those they've packed in tobacco, and they'll be put on the shelves to make it look like it's a bottle of alcohol, but actually it contains illicit tobacco. If we go on to the next photo, Mark, thank you. This is a till. So in a lot of premises, you'll find that actually the tills contain some of the illicit goods. So what you see here on the left-hand side are some Viagra tablets in amongst a till. So these are just the ideas of some of the places that they can conceal these items. If you go into the next photo, this is obviously a tobacco gantry. Normally that would be covered, that's been opened up so we can take that photo. The reason that I've put this in there is because sometimes a lot of traders like to hide things in plain sight. Because tobacco, when it comes to cigarettes and hand rolling tobacco, everything is now supposed to be in standardized packaging. When we have counterfeit standardized packaged tobacco, it will be hidden within, it will be put in the gantry. So we do need to look in there, because sometimes it's trying to be passed off as a genuine item when it is in fact not. If we carry on to the next photo, this is a photo that was taken as a result of a warrant that was done by the Trading Standards Service a year or 2 years ago. We received some intelligence, and we were made aware that the trader was holding a significant quantity of tobacco, not only in the shop, but upstairs in the residential premises, the flat above the shop. So we obtained a warrant and we actioned it. This is becoming a common occurrence now. So when we go to shops, we'll have illicit goods, but not vast quantities. Traders are now hiding them elsewhere to try and conceal them and hide them from us. So we're becoming aware. So as we do more and more visits, our process of how we go about doing our visits evolves, and we're changing the way we do that now, because obviously the way that traders operate is very different. So in that photo, if you can have a look, on the sofa there's a load of tobacco in these individual boxes, and then on the very left corner you can see these boxes which look like they contain inflatables, like an inflatable seat. What was contained in there was significant quantities of cigarettes. So the dog were able to sniff those out, and also we opened them to check what was inside. And that's a way that people smuggle tobacco into the country, by concealing it and trying to pass it off as a legitimate product. So that's just an example. These are kind of things that we do find. If we go on to the next slide, when we go out on these visits, everything that we find different quantities of things. Once they've been looked at and examined, we send samples off of the items that we've seized to brand representatives, so we can get confirmation as to the status of the goods. Once we receive confirmation as to the status of the goods, we'd look to interview the trader to ascertain what defence, if at all, they have for what they've done and their actions. And we will always consider, if it's a off-licensed premises or a licensed premises, we'd consider taking them to license review. And we often do. There's a lot of license reviews that come to the committee that are actioned by Trading Standards. We will also consider prosecution for Trading Standards offences. So it's a way. The other forms of deterrence, our main aim when we go out as a service is to ensure compliance with the legislation, and obviously we make decisions accordingly based on how the business operates, and hopefully it sends out a message to other traders that if you do this kind of activity, this is the kind of outcome that can happen. If we go to the next slide, Mark, this is a press release that went out this week as a result of some work that an action day that we did as a service on the 29th of September. We are out. We are a reactive service, but we action the complaints that we receive. And on this particular day, we went out to 10 premises. We seized at 6 premises. One of those premises was a significant seizure. And we would like to put that information out in the public domain to let people know that this is happening, to try and act as a deterrent for other traders to not engage in this level of activity, to let them know that we will come out, we will come visit, and it's just useful for people to know. That's it. Thank you very much for your time. That is a very general overview. I have loads more photos, but I couldn't put them all in. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Kieran, thank you very much for that. Does anybody have questions for Kieran, please? Not seeing anyone indicating. No.
No, Chairman.
I do have a couple of questions, Kieran. First of all, is it the case for every visit that you need to have a warrant?
No, we have powers to enter business premises during normal operational hours to any business premise in the course of their duties. The reason why we requested a warrant for the one I specified was because it was a residential premise above the flat, so it wasn't actually the business premise.
I understand. So just so I'm clear about this, you can enter business premises at any time.
Yes, we can.
But if there was a need to move into connected residential, that would require a warrant. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. My second question is that, and this is this has come about from the experience of a couple of recent licensing reviews that I've been involved with.
Okay.
I've noticed that it's been, it may well be this is just a phenomenon of the pandemic, I don't know, but it hasn't always been easy to get confirmations from the supposed manufacturers of the products as to the counterfeit or non-duty paid nature of some of the products that have been impounded. I mean, this is obviously pretty frustrating for you, I would imagine, and difficult. Is that an ongoing problem, and are there ways that can be improved?
So yes, we did experience some issues. So there was a lot of stuff that was sent off earlier this year for analysis, and we didn't receive results until much later on. It varies from brand holder to brand holder, because some of the brand holders will do a examination within this country, some of them where their main brand and then analysis is done external to the UK, they are sending them abroad. So we would send them off to a representative in this country, and they may then send it elsewhere. And then there's been a delay, obviously, because of COVID and the pandemic. So that has delayed us in getting some results. But it's not usually a common occurrence. It doesn't take as long as it has this year. So hopefully it shouldn't be an issue, provided we're not in lockdown or other countries are not in lockdown.
Okay, if you'd like to bear with us for a minute, councillors, until the chairman rejoins the meeting. Councillor Oswell and Councillor Sullivan have rejoined as well, so if you stand by for a minute.
Yeah, sorry about that, Mark. My Wi-Fi went down. I had to reboot the server, and it normally takes about 2 or 3 minutes, but it seems to have worked. It's happened before, and it will probably happen again. But hope it doesn't again today, because I got North planning tonight. So there you go.
Thank you, councillor.
Okay.
My apologies to a lost Wi-Fi connection.
Thank you. So we'll just wait for the chairman to rejoin. And right, Councillor Dennis, would you be happy to start the next item and ask
yes,
Stephanie to, Daniel Ferret, Daniel from licensing, to introduce it, please?
yeah, no, very much so. So just to confirm, we've finished with the article on trading standards, and thank you very much for giving us that presentation. Very interesting to see work you get to do, and hopefully one day I get to meet the dogs, because they look very cute.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt me. Please, may I be excused?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for that presentation. It's very interesting.
Thank you for your time,
So
councillors. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you. And so if we move on to the next item, which is the consultation on our statement of licensing policy. So Daniel, can you take the lead on this?
Hi there, good morning, Councillor Dennis. Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members of the Licensing Committee. I hope you are well. I hope your families and your loved ones are well too. Just on the back of Kieran's presentation, I'd just like to add that the the great work that their team does, headed by Martin King. And since my time for a year here at Hillingdon, we've built an excellent relationship where it was already there, but the work they've done, the various reviews that they've put in, testament to the hard work that they do, and we've got positive results from that. So just on the back of that, well, today I'm here to talk to you about the exciting topic of the redrafting, revising of the statement of licensing policy. And I don't have any cute pictures of sniffer dogs, I'm afraid. You have the black and white report at Agenda 7, page 7. It's a chunky document, but how I'd like to sort of present this and frame it is looking at the why we are doing it, what changes we're making, and how we propose to do that. So let's get cracking. So let's start with why. Why are we reviewing this statement of licensing? Well, simply because, like other local authorities now in this position and this time frame, and there's a legal obligation under the Act, to review the licensing policy every 5 years. And for us to review, the current one was revised and adopted in January 2016. And so obviously January 2021 is our timeline to put in the new revised policy. And it's important because that policy must be published before any of the functions, individual applications dealt with or notices have to be in place before we carry out those functions. So it's a crucial document in part of our licensing process. So clearly one of the aims is to meet that timeline of January 2021. And there's also other aims included as well. On my part, carrying out a thorough review of the current policy, looking at it professionally and diligently. Also carrying out the proper process, working with legal and making sure that consultation is legal and we follow the proper due process. Also, I suppose long-term, the aim is to have a document that is practical, easily understandable and accessible, and most importantly, consistent with the Licensing Act 2003 and the Section 182 guidance attached to it. And also, I would say another aim is to provide us with an opportunity at this point in time to necessarily look at the future on how we want to go and what avenues we take in the future. So, what are those changes? And I must say from the outset, there are no massive major changes. There is no cumulative impact zone that is suddenly imposed. We haven't taken out massive chunks of paragraphs of the policy. Instead, I would say that the changes are sensible, reasonable, and really refreshes the licensing policy. And as I said, in line with the up-to-date licensing guidance and the actual legislation instead. And I feel that that through this process, we're providing a statement that provides clarity, consistency, and certainty. And besides, the current policy, let's not forget, has served us well in the last 5 years where we haven't been opened up to any challenge of any sort. So let's move on to those changes. And I thought I'd look at the new sections that we have added, started with, and you don't have to go to the policy. I'm quite happy to sort of read out the sections. Section 6, the partnership and working initiative. This section has been added because we wanted to really underline and expressly highlight the importance of joint working and collaboration. Because as you know, it's key to have these partnership relationships to get things sorted in terms of licensing. So building on those relationships with trading standards, the police, environmental health, but also looking at other organisations such as the pub watch schemes and any business improvement districts. In this section, we've also included and recognised schemes that we may want to look at in the future, important schemes such as Best Bar None and the Purple Flag. And these are practical schemes that look into improving standards in the evening and nighttime economy. So that's partnership and initiative. Section 8, the new Section 8, the Immigration Act, a new section added, and it basically takes into account of the Home Office immigration now becoming a responsible authority. And also emphasising the point that where an applicant is an individual, he or she puts in an application for a premises licence or a personal licence, it is key for them to disclose certain relevant documents that shows that they have the right to work. And also in this section, we've included the consequences and failure if they don't, if that right to work lapses. For example, the premises will lapse and the authorisation will lapse. At section 9, the new section 9, we've added a section on modern day slavery, again, taking into account new legislation, which has come in force since the last policy, the Modern Day Slavery Act 2015. And the paragraphs here emphasise the role of all authorities to play their part. So in practice, how I see this is if officers were going out to not be tunnel vision or blindsided by other issues that they may detect on future visits in late evenings or other parts of the boroughs that are not well visited, that we highlight those and record those and send them to the responsible authorities. Section 24 is quite an interesting and topical section that we've added, and that's all about mobile, remote and internet sales. So that basically deals with and us sort of looking into the future in terms of innovation in e-commerce, because essentially what we've seen in these last few months is pubs, licensed premises adapting their operation. For example, purchasing alcohol by an app in a beer garden, taking those into account, also changing their operation to carry out deliveries. These all go through a licensing process, and us putting something expressly in the licensing policy leads us into sort of more certainty and more things that we can consider while looking at those types of applications. At section 7, we've slightly retitled the promotion of equality section to equality duty. Now, I don't want to talk too much about this because I know Glenn is going to talk about an update in his legal updates, but it's essentially to emphasise that a public authority must now exercise its functions consistent with the Equality Act 2020. And so, for example, during this consultation process, we as a licensing body had to carry out an equalities impact assessment form. So those are the main new changes. I'm just going to highlight some of the bits that we've sort of added. Public health and licensing on section 14. Again, very topical at this moment in time, because during all these COVID visits and enforcement action happening around the borough, there is becoming a blur and a coming together of public health and the licensing forum. And so the intention of putting a section like this will take into account where there are issues with public health and taking them into the realms of the licensing. And we have seen this with the London Government Association, I think a couple of months ago, basically recommending that there should be another licensing objective added to the Act, that of public health. So we see it going that way, and we have essentially flagged it up in the policy. The role of ward councillors within section 18, and I want to highlight this point because, as you know, we've consulted on it, and a councillor has come back to me wanting me to clarify the point on the role of ward councillors, and there are no major changes. It clarifies, yes, that councillors may still apply for a review of a premises licence, and they still can contact our head of service. We ask that it's also gone through the licensing authority process, and so if a hearing has to be held, it will be held. So it's just making that concrete, and there's no major changes there. An interesting few additions that we've added is in the decision making and the licensing hearings. All we've added there is the benefit I see in terms of the mediation, working with applicants and other responsible authorities to resolve issues before they go to a hearing. And in some cases where all those issues have been resolved, no need for a hearing. And this encourages efficiency in our work and licensings to be pushed out timely and having hearings where it's really contentious. Also in the licensing hearings section, we've added and flagged up the YouTube channel, which is working great for us since we've done virtual hearings. And so just reminding people that it will be recorded, and so them to be wary of that. Also in this licensing hearing and decision-making sections, we've emphasised general principles such as that during these hearings, there'll be neither nor actual nor appearance of any bias, and essentially that the rules of natural justice will apply, and these hearings will be full and fair, and also that they'll be discussed and considered on their merits. All the things that we're doing anyway, but expressly putting them in. That lastly takes me to the role of enforcement, and it's the new section 21. And really, what we've set down here is setting down the expectations of the licensing authorities for all the license holders or applicants. So there is no doubt what we expect from them. They will get proactive inspections, but also risk-rated inspections and reactive inspections to ensure that there's compliance with conditions where those licenses have been granted. We've also added more detail on reviews, particularly expedited reviews, which is becoming more topical more and more around the country. And so we've, if you like, detailed that and fleshed it out more, saying that there is no requirement to hold an official physical hearing, but like this, a virtual hearing, and those interim steps that can be made by the licensing subcommittee can be done in 2 working days, that they're recorded and that a full hearing will come off the expedited review. So adding more detail there. So there in summary are the main changes. I've rattled through that quite quickly. And so the next question probably is, how are we going to do that? And I think that's best answered on page 8 of the bundle. And it's essentially the timetable of how we're going to implement that. Our consultation started on the 5th of October. 14th of October, here we are, the licensing committee. Tomorrow evening, we have the ReSpoc committee hearing. Our consultation will end on the 22nd of October, and there we will collate and gather all the comments and all the representations in relation to the policy. The final policy will be put forward on the 10th of December 2020, and in the new year, hopefully, fingers crossed, 14th of January 2021, it will be considered by full policy. And so you know what I will be doing come Christmas time and New Year. Essentially, that is it. In conclusion, going back, if you like, to the full aims and objective, it's our intention to have a solid policy in force, which is free from any challenge, that it's legally sound, we follow the processes and procedures, and also, obviously, it fulfills our corporate vision in not only supporting and putting residents first, but also looking and educating our businesses and other stakeholders. And finally, it is our hope that this policy will help serve us further in carrying out our licensing function for the next 5 years. Chairman, those are my comments and submissions in relation to the consultation. If you have any queries, I'm quite happy to take any on any point.
So, Councillor Dennis, I believe the chairman has rejoined. This is not a decision item, it's for consultation. So, Chairman, are you happy to resume?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Apologies. We seem to have had a complete broadband outage in this area, so apologies for my absence from that. Can I ask if there are any questions? Councillor Allen.
I have questions as well.
Thank you. On page 18, consultation, and it gives us a list of all those who are consulted. Can I ask, with particular reference to residents' associations, are they automatically sent a consultation paper out, or do they have to read it on the government website, on the council website, and then apply to be consulted? That's my first question.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Allen. So last week I sent an email to all the resident associations, and it sends them the link to our website, which has details of how they can submit their comments. Also, there's links of all the relevant documents, i.e. the summary of the changes, the draft policy, and also the equal impact assessment.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask some more questions, please?
Sure.
Reading this document, and I probably say I'm going wrong somewhere, there's nothing on betting shops in here. Is that going to be a separate?
Yeah, so the gambling policy was, I believe, refreshed and revised earlier this year. So that wouldn't fall in the realms of the Licensing Act. That would be the Gambling Act policy.
And my last question on this is, we all know that we had an issue with shisha bars, and we were told the government was looking at it. Has anything come back on that, with them being reined in and brought into licensing?
Yeah, I don't want to step on the next speakers. Stephanie is more than likely to speak about shisha because she's covering the COVID regulations and the enforcement. So I think it'll be handled by Stephanie on that point.
Okay, then. Thank you so much, Daniel.
That's all right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. You got 3 for the price of 1 there.
Yep. Buy 1, get 2 free.
Councillor Dennis.
Thank you, Chairman. I've also got 3 points, but hopefully they're very quick, so it won't take too long. Firstly, obviously, it was really interesting to read this as a sort of member of the committee. So it was a really great excuse to sort of go through this all. It seemed to read clear to me as somebody who hadn't read it before. So very good. My first point is that I think you should do some referencing or hyperlinking to certain things within this guidance, because obviously if somebody's reading it and they're making an application, you know, they might want to look at, you know, what is the purple flag and the best bar none.
Yeah, sure.
So either through referencing or hyperlink. You don't have to hyperlink every single reference to an act or anything like that, but that would make it useful for the reader. And sort of building on that, personally, I would like to have sort of more information about the purple flag, the best bar none, maybe even the guidance issued under section 182 of the Act to do with licensing. So if it's possible, you can send to me and the other members of the committee just hyperlinks so we can read a bit more about that, because these are all new to me.
Okay, I can certainly do that.
That would be really appreciated. And my last point is a very pernickety point, but which you don't have to take on board at all. But 21.3, where it says the licensing authority shall focus on agreed problem and high-risk premises which require greater attention. I mean, I would remove the word agreed because I just don't think it's necessary. Because agreed with who and what does that mean? But that's probably me just being overly detailed. So if there's a good reason why agreed isn't in there, please do keep it in. And that's everything from me.
We can certainly look at that 21.3 on agreed problems. Asking shall focus on agreed problems and. Okay, I suppose it's more.
If you think there's a good reason for keeping it in, do keep it in.
I mean, we'll certainly consider that. I guess the intention behind that paragraph is what we have are obviously tasking meetings where we sort of collaborate with other departments, and so agreeing on courses of action is probably the reference. Well, it's more than likely to be the reference for that, but we'll definitely sort of consider what you've said, but also mentioning those hyperlinks. I'll look at that, and also you know, your first point about interesting reading. It was interesting, sort of like re-looking it and drafting it as well. As sad as that sounds.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. I think I saw you indicating.
Yeah, I'm following on basically from Councillor Allen's question. What actually constitutes a residents' association? Because there are residents' associations that I know nothing about this at all. So do they have to be, I don't know, registered or something? It's just that there are a lot of people are missing out on this, including, for example, High Point Village, the old vinyl factory, just 2 big, big estates near where I live.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Goddard. I mean, what I acquired last week is a list of all the resident associations that I thought that there were. But certainly, if there are some that are missing for that are residents association, clearly we will inform them and advise them as soon as we can. I wasn't aware that we would miss any, but that's an important part of the process in terms of consultation. So I will relook at that, and most definitely. But I was just going on the existing records that the council have, but perhaps they need a refresh as well. But I will definitely look into that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or observations for Dan?
Councillor Goddard?
Yeah, Councillor Lavery, please go ahead.
Perhaps I might help, Daniel. I do wonder whether the list you've been supplied of resident associations may well be those who are part of the Hillingdon Association of Resident Associations, more commonly known as HARA. There are various other groups which would be tenants associations and so forth, and I wouldn't necessarily know that they're part of that. So I suspect as new housing evolves, in Councillor Gardner referenced the old vinyl factory, which would be a relatively new grouping. I suspect I would I would expect there are probably groups missed off that so I wouldn't imagine, Daniel, your list is entirely comprehensive, depending on where it's been sourced from.
Yeah.
Because these do move to a degree, and there are various groupings. So you may need to do a little more work to ensure you reach all.
No, thank you for that, Councillor Draper. We will do.
I mean, Daniel, could I suggest maybe the right way in terms of dealing with this would be a note to all ward councillors, actually,
Yeah.
to make sure that the residents' associations that they deal with are on your list.
Yeah, I'll do that, Chairman.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on Daniel's presentation? Okay, great. Well, we'll thank you for that, Daniel. We will then move to a review of licensing subcommittee hearing protocols. And Stephanie, I think this is with you, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. It is me. Thank you, Chairman. So item number 8 in your packs, members, really just brings up the licensing subcommittee hearing protocols for you. And we haven't actually reviewed these for, it's got to be five to 6 years now. And because we're reviewing the policy and because there's some changes and there's just been some general changes to the way we do business, particularly over the last 6 months, it's timely to review the licensing subcommittee procedures as well. So in the report, we've listed them out for you. There's 6 in total, although you only really deal with probably 2 to 3 in most business throughout the year. That being the Licensing Act 2003 protocol, which is your most prominent tool in your toolkit, the gambling one, and then the street trading one, which comes up less often. The other ones there, sex establishment licenses, film classifications, and scrap metal dealers. Even in my time in licensing, I could probably count on fingers of one hand when we've actually used those. So these hearing protocols, they underpin the way that hearings, licensing subcommittees are conducted, and they're open and transparent, and it lets all parties and members know exactly what to expect throughout those hearings. I've listed on page 70 for you just some topics that we may want to bounce around today for discussion. And I know that Councillor Goddard actually emailed all of you members last week to suggest some points for discussion. So I'm happy to take questions, take your points for discussion, but the main proposal is that officers have a look. We have a discussion today on some changes, some new sections or some proposals, and then officers will form those into a new draft document ready for you to review at the next January meeting. So Councillor Goddard, I'll revert back to you to begin the discussion.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Well, let me invite other members to raise any comments and questions they have. Councillor Dennis.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, thank you, Stephanie, for this, because again, being new to this committee is really useful to read what is expected of me. So that is very good. My one question actually relates to a comment in the minutes from last year's meeting under 22 committee forward plan. There was something, the top bullet point says to consider an appropriate member visit to a licensed premises as advised and organised by the licensing service. And that was something obviously raised to look at. Now, in all the stuff that I've read, there's nothing about, if I wanted to visit a premises, can I, should I, is there a process to go through or anything like that? So I just wanted a bit more information about that.
Yeah, sure. So it is something that's been bounced around over the last few years about member visits. It is commonplace in a lot of other boroughs, and what I'd recommend, if that's the way the committee were minded to go, that we produce a protocol for that, so that we wouldn't be in a situation where it wasn't properly organised and it wasn't open and transparent. And I think
other boroughs, for example, they will take the licensing subcommittee to the premises, and they will be given a guided visit by the presenting licensing officer, very, very factual, sort of guide. So we could perhaps look to some other boroughs to get best practice and introduce that into the protocol, if that's the way members were minded to go on that.
I mean, personally, I think that would be a good idea, but obviously something for the committee to discuss. But if we went down that route, something else related that would be interesting to me as well is to make sure that we don't cross over that grey area line between licensing and planning, because obviously planning has an important part in sort of licensing applications, not with what we deal with, but in other matters. So it would be useful if such a protocol was developed. Maybe there could be some sort of mention to make sure that we don't slip over into considering planning matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And our policy makes mention of the very clear divide with planning, but you're quite right. The two areas very often become muddied. So yes, I think any protocol would have regard to, clear planning considerations and clear licensing considerations, so that you'd be kind of guided within those parameters. Yeah.
Any more, Councillor Dennis, on that? Thank you. Yeah, I mean, just a comment from me on that. I think there is a concern, perhaps, that if subcommittee members are acting on their own initiative with things such as site visits, that information can be generated which doesn't come into the subcommittee hearing by the right channels. And so I certainly would be in favour of having a protocol such as this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Councillor Lavery.
If I could just add, obviously I've got considerable experience of site visits with a planning hat on.
Absolutely.
And therefore, my cautions are, and this will be for the officers, they do need to be guided and heavily guided, because there is a temptation for members, quite rightly, to get into asking lots of questions, or for applicants to attempt to influence the process by providing additional information, and almost a discussion ensues if you're not very careful. So very clear guidance needs to be given to members that these visits are only ever undertaken as part of a group led by an officer with a clear protocol.
Yep.
To ensure that it is a factual visit and you don't get into a debate around the merits of the application. It's just to see the situation on the ground. They can be useful, they can add clarity and detail, but there can be, and it needs to be very carefully managed to ensure it doesn't slip into the realms of kind of a discussion on the ground, or information coming in, I think as Councillor Dennis said, via the back door, because that is a risk, and we do see it on planning visits, and we have to be very careful that we stick to that. Effectively all questions and presentations go through the officer who's leading the visit, to ensure that it is properly managed in that way.
Thank you for that, Councillor Lavery. Glenn, I think I saw you indicating.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just to add to that, there was a case about 5 years ago involving Broxbourne Council, where the committee there was decided not to have a site visit. Nonetheless, the chairman then went to do a site visit on his own, and when the license was revoked, that was one of the grounds of appeal. And not wishing to scare members, but that chairman was then subject to a whole day of cross-examination when the appeal went to the magistrates' court. He'd acted with the best of intentions, but didn't follow advice, and eventually the decision of board council was overturned on appeal, and they were landed with a bill of about £30,000. So what I would just echo there is if members have any concerns about premises, bring those first of all to officers' attention. That way we can address them and protect you from any adverse consequences that might arise there. So yeah, I just echo the advice previously given there, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm just looking for other comments and questions that members might have.
Can't see any, Chairman.
Perhaps then I might go to my list Stephanie, that I did circulate to everyone. It seems to me this is actually quite connected to point 3 on my list, which talks about perhaps the need for greater clarity and detail in licensing officers' reports. I think the reality is that we are compelled to stick with the application form that the applicant has to submit, which it is possible to submit that prepare it in a very asinine and lacking in detail and colour way, which perhaps can persuade one that there is a need for more information. Therefore, I think perhaps there needs to be a discussion around the level of detail, and perhaps on occasions clarifications of various points, which perhaps the licensing officer might include in their report. Once the application form has been received, and that might include things like, for example, the company's house searches, and it might include follow up on information that has been provided by interested parties who perhaps are objecting.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we discussed briefly in our briefing last week that the officer's observation section of the report could perhaps be reviewed and actually contain more within there, and the officers could give more of an observation on the application on the premises than is currently contained. And you are quite right, we are stuck with government prescribed application forms. They are they're not brilliant, and they actually haven't been revised since the Act came in 2005. Although they're very lengthy, they don't actually provide us with often what we're looking for in an application, and actually helping you as members to make that assessment. And even officers, when it's delegated officer power, you can have a very scant application that you are now being asked to consider licensing. So yes, there's a lot more that we could potentially pull into the officer's observation section on the report, and particularly as has come up in recent cases, where there's sort of submissions being put forward by responsible authorities or even interested parties, that those are investigated fully, and that any withheld or missing information, there's just more of a narrative about that in the actual officer's observation section of the reports, which I think would help.
Yes, thank you for that. Councillor Allen, you indicated.
Thank you. I don't know whether it's here that I should raise this. What really concerns me is when you get an application come forward and residents take the time to read the application and then put in their objections, and then they mention ASBIT or they mention the police, and it's in their report, so it's checkable, but officers and the police don't bother to turn up. It leaves the resident with a nasty taste in their mouth, and it doesn't do the police or the council justice, because the residents are saying, why are we bothering? Nobody's listening. They're taking note of it, but they're not backing us. And I think there's an element of trust missing there. So when a resident puts in an objection, and there is ASBIT mention, or there is police mention, or there is another interest officer, we should have those officers in the room to respond to that. If those CAD numbers are not relevant, then we should have a written note telling us why they're not relevant. So I'd like to see something better than we've got on that, because I think that's an area of weakness for us.
If perhaps I could interject here, I think maybe there's a problem of sequencing here, because what can happen is that the application is received, responses come in from responsible authorities, and then potentially comments come in from objectors and interested parties, local residents, after that. I don't know if this is the case, but I think there probably is a recent example that Councillor Allen and I will remember, where in fact, the police had no objections and therefore were not attending the hearing. And then we had a resident who cited a sequence of CAD numbers, and it actually caused an adjournment of the hearing whilst we resolved the issue, or partially resolved it. So yeah, I mean, maybe, I don't know, Stephanie, the answer comes back again to greater follow-up by the licensing officer before the report is issued. But I don't know, perhaps you'd like to comment on that.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Allen, for making those points. And I think there is some more work that can be done by licensing officers in the follow-ups. I think a lot of the time when the you've got a 28-day consultation period, and all the responsible authorities will consider their case, and 9 times out of 10 will decide not to put anything in where they don't have any justification or evidence to do so. Excuse me. What we get then is residents, as you quite rightly pointed out, coming to us and saying, oh, but hold on a minute, I made these calls to the police and I made these calls to ASBIT, but we haven't been presented with that evidence. So there is a little bit more that the officers could do. However, I would just advise that it's often very, very difficult trying to work with particularly external authorities like the police, who have their own pressures and their own issues in their own business areas, and actually trying to get them to delve deep into a case, or to carry out a lot more sort of research into something. We are at their we are hanging, waiting for them to take some action, and some of the time it's not doable. With the ASBIT side, yes, that's absolutely a bit more that we could do, but I think the position that you as members are left with is to say, well, okay, well, the resident is saying this, the responsible authority is saying this, how do you weight that evidence? And it's really just for members to say, well, okay, well, we're not going to attach much weight to what that resident may be saying, because there's nothing to support it, or we're not going to take on board what the responsible authority is saying, because again, you don't feel that there's much weight to it. So you are left, if in the absence of any forthcoming information, or 100% of the information that you're wanting in order to make your decision, it's for you to weight the evidence. And if the evidence is not there, then you've got the option to adjourn and ask for more information. But then even after that, if it's not there, then you'd be forced into a situation where you've got to weight it appropriately. And it's not ideal, but that is what. Yes, go on, Councillor Anna.
Councillor Anna.
I'm listening to what you're saying, Stephanie, but if a CAD number is issued by the police, it isn't issued for, if it's issued for something general, then they don't need to respond to it. But if a CAD number is issued, sorry, it's my phone. If a CAD number is issued that many times, and we're referring to a certain case, we won't go into detail here, but if that CAD number is mentioned all those times, there's got to be some substance to what
I absolutely agree.
And equally with ASBIT, if ASBIT pays a visit, then that's what we need to know. But when we're told nothing to see here, or it wasn't a big thing, and we have to accept that, the resident out there, we're not interested. It's not us that's being affected; it's you're being affected, and the police, because the residents out there are feeling, hold up, why are they issuing us with flimsy CAD numbers when they're not going to do anything about it? Why is ASBIT, who's come and seen the problem but doesn't think it's a big issue, not coming along and saying that? So the residents are left with false hope.
Yeah, I do appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Allen. I think the difficulty for licensing officers is sometimes they do try extremely hard to get the extra information, and because we're reliant on other services, other teams, sometimes it is just not forthcoming. And there is a kind of a limit to what we can do in terms of asking those authorities to provide information. And I think I do go back to this weighting of evidence thing, you know, where you know, you may have a series of CAD numbers, but actually a CAD number is given on any call to the police. What you're actually looking for is proven problems, you know, proven problems, proven crimes, proven disorder, proven antisocial behaviour, where there's actually been, you know, a cause for something to be proven, whether in court or whether via notices, whether via some other course of action. And you are looking at that kind of proven, which would give you the most weighty evidence in order to make your decision.
Can I then respectfully suggest that residents are informed that CAD numbers are just that, they're just numbers to say we visited? Because in the residents' eyes, and I'm sure I speak for lots of councillors here, in a resident's eyes, when they say they've had a CAD number, that is something. It's not an officer glancing over a fence, it's an officer has attended. So do you see where I'm coming? I'm interested in making sure the residents are seeing you and the police in a good light, and that action's being taken with, but it's not at this stage. And we're hearing it time and again.
It's you know, it is a case of looking behind those CAD numbers and actually seeing what came out of it. What was the end result of those CAD numbers? If an officer is attended, what was the outcome? You know, either there was a problem or there wasn't. So I think that you know, that does come back to the licensing officers kind of digging a little bit in terms of producing the report for you. However, you know, like I said, sometimes we are at the mercy of our colleagues in other authorities. And you know, and external or internal.
And wording then.
Sorry.
Change that wording, because in the residents' eyes, a CAD number means they've been there, they've seen what's going on, and then the resident says, "Hold up, we're at that meeting, and the police aren't interested in coming along." They do not understand what that word CAD means.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I won't go labour it further, but.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. I mean, perhaps if I can interject, and I'm aware that I've got two councillors indicating, Councillor Gardner and then Councillor Chapman, but perhaps if I may just make a comment here. I mean, it seems to me that, you know, it's absolutely within the capacity of the licensing team to investigate any cited CAD numbers. Stephanie, I believe there should be an expectation that any subcommittee, to the extent to which they're receiving representations that cite CAD numbers, then at the very least there will be an investigation by the licensing team as far as they can, and I appreciate that may not always be comprehensive, of those CAD numbers. Whether you can then persuade the police to reconsider their decision about representations, I accept that is difficult. That's at their discretion. They're a responsible authority. They're independent. I appreciate you can't compel them to attend, but I think the investigation I would suggest is you know, by the licensing team to the maximum extent of their ability is important in this context. Can I turn to Councillor Gardner?
Yeah, on this. Surely, if we speak to the ASBET team, we speak to the police, it's not that difficult. All they have to do is a sentence which says there's no substance to the allegations, and that can be either from the police or the ASBET. That is then something that we can take back to our residents and say, okay, these things we complained about, there's no substance to the allegations. It's just like, I mean, we're only talking about a sentence, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you described it as an issue of sequencing, to be honest. Myself, Councillor Allen and yourself all know the hearing that we're alluding to. The police said for themselves they had nothing to say. One of the respondents had CAD numbers. I think it basically looked poor, shall we say, or unprofessional, that we had to adjourn the meeting to seek further evidence. I think if it had been sequenced that we nonetheless went back to the police before the first meeting and said, you have nothing in yourself to say, however, somebody else has quoted these CAD numbers, can you confirm what the significance is? We would have then had all the information for the first meeting. in the end, we did get the information, but it was at the interlude between the first and the second meeting. If we'd sequenced it in such a way that we'd gone back to the police before the first meeting, we'd have got the same information in a timely manner, and it would have all been done on one day. So as you say, I think it's just having that little loop in the system to sequence it back to them. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lavery, I think I saw you indicating, and then Councillor Arnold.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Goddard. Yeah, I mean, I would endorse that. If we can get that sequencing correct, I think that would help our processes. You see exactly the same issues happen in planning, and over the years we've found ways of trying to tie up this information so you can work out, you know, the gaps that you've got. So if that, I think, would be helpful and avoid the need to do it. A couple of observations in terms of meetings, and I don't know whether the Act prevents us from doing so, but we currently have no time limits on speakers. They can effectively, you're reliant on your skills, Mr. Chairman, to bring matters to a close as appropriate. And I wonder whether there is a possibility.
Difficult on other occasions, I might have.
I have the luxury in the planning world of having a timer running, which it can be very effective in drawing matters to a close. And I wonder whether we have that option to set some sort of time guidance as to how long people can speak for, because I think there is a danger. And I certainly did one hearing early before outside your timescale, but where we merely repeated information for 3 hours. Effectively, every group said almost what every other group had said, and we just went round in a circle for quite a long time without ever coming to anything new. So I do wonder whether we have an opportunity to do that, and I'd be grateful for Stephanie's comments on that. And the other thing I think could be useful, certainly to planning committee members, to licensing committee members, I understand that the planning and licensing legislation are separate, but certainly in terms of premises, there is some overlap. Now, where we're being asked to grant a late night license, and this is where I see the overlap, a late night license in particular, I think it would be helpful to understand whether planning committee and planners have imposed any restrictions on the opening hours of those premises. Because clearly, if planners have said, you know, this premises has got to be cleared by 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock or whatever, and there's a late night license on the table till 3 o'clock, well, clearly planners have imposed those for a reason that it would seem illogical that you can grant a premises license that runs longer. I accept there are two different bits of legislation, but I think it might be helpful to committee members to understand how planners put no restrictions on, in which case the late night license is entirely as it is, or have planners already put restrictions on the premises, in which case why are we looking at a license that goes way beyond that? But perhaps Stephanie can enlighten me.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Yes, I'll just start on the planning point. I completely agree with you. It is sometimes very illogical what the council does with one arm and what it does with another. That can be completely contradictory. And in my time, I've seen many decisions that don't join up at all, and they're saying completely different things. However, it's very clear in law on both sides, in planning and licensing, that one cannot and should not influence the other. Purely because under planning there are a set of considerations under the planning legislation, our own local policy framework, and under licensing there are very different considerations under the Act and also our local policy and the Section 182 guidance. Sometimes they marry up, and nuisance can be relevant in both regimes, and conditions and restrictions can be imposed due to sort of the nuisance side of things, certainly opening hours. But the legislation is very clear in that they must remain wholly separate, and one cannot influence the other. And I would completely agree that it makes no sense whatsoever. However, that is what the laws give us to work with, particularly where we're talking about opening hours as well. And I know of many cases where we've granted something and then the planning have granted another. And I would be extremely hesitant about including anything in relation to planning actually within the report, because that should not influence any licensing decision. So I appreciate it's not an ideal situation, but ultimately it will be for the operator to comply with both, not one or the other, or one over the other. So they will have to find a way to comply with both, and that may mean that they've got to either vary their planning or they've got to vary their license to make them more in synergy with each other. But yeah, that's pretty much what the situation is. I'd also pick up your point about time limits. We have got that power to impose time limits, and we have considered imposing time limits at various stages in the past. It's just not something we've ever done. We did do it for one expedited review hearing a long time ago, and we did find ourselves in a bit of a sticky judicial review situation. So it's not particularly something I would like to revisit. And what I would say is that the situations where you're actually going to sort of look to impose a time limit are where you've got lots and lots of interested parties attending a hearing, and you know, taking an example with lots of residents' involvement, and they've all got very similar things to say. One of the things that we'd often recommend is that they agree a spokesperson to speak on behalf of all of them. If they're all from, you know, the same neighbourhood, the same block of flats, the same with all the same views, that they appoint a spokesperson, and that is something that the licensing officer could look to do a little bit more persuasively, let's say, before a licensing committee hearing where we've got a load of residents, and we kind of strongly recommend that they appoint a spokesperson, and if anybody's got anything additional to add, then they can do so. But I'd be quite hesitant about putting a time limit on, only because of, you know, it does have an adverse, it can have a very adverse effect, and people can feel like they haven't had their enough time to put across their say. I don't know if Glenn's dropped out of the meeting, but if he is there, I don't know, perhaps you have another view on that, or maybe we can ask him in a little while. But yeah, I mean, it is an option, but I know very few councils that actually do that.
Yeah, Glenn, I would welcome your views on this, because certainly being selfish about it as a chairman, I would love it if we. You're absolutely right.
Chairman, thanks. The connection is poor. If I may just dial in as well as a safeguard.
Glenn, what I might suggest is if you just turn off your camera and just go audio as you are now, see if that works first. Okay.
Okay, hopefully.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Just to let you know, I can see about 3 faces. That's all I can see. So I'm not quite sure who's on the meeting there, but I can hear everybody. I think this is something just to take away and look at. Officers can look at again, because let's see what other authorities do there. Let's see if there's any case law on this. I mean, as you say, the council has a very proud tradition of putting residents first. Once you start limiting their ability to speak at committee, they feel perhaps let down by the council, and it takes a lot of courage to come along to committee. And so it's a question then of striking the right balance there in terms of allowing residents to fully have their say, but also then not wasting the committee's time. So can I put my thinking cap on with Stephanie and colleagues there and see if we can come up with some suggestions there that you might then want to consider. But let's look at this and see how it would operate in the round, I think.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful, Glenn. Perhaps I can move to Councillor Arnold now. I believe you indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to actually talk about some of the things that Councillor Lavery mentioned about the sort of difference between planning and licensing and how it doesn't seem to quite add up. But Stephanie, I think you answered that question concisely. My second question is around the nature of due diligence of an application. Do we routinely make sure that if they list a company, that company is in existence? that the shareholders of that company are who they say are, and then the applicant, if he lists an address, actually lives at their address. The main reason is I think it goes towards the integrity of the applicant.
The company's house check is not something that we routinely do. However, I have discussed this with colleagues in legal, and there's no reason why we couldn't do that. Just as a bit of additional information, in the same way that we present any other factual information in the report for you. It's all public records, so I really can't see an issue with that. So that's something we're going to start doing going forward, is just providing you with that company's house information and any commentary within the officer report if it's necessary. The verification on the address is not something we would do, and I'm not entirely sure whether that would be overstepping our boundaries in terms of assessment. They don't. I mean, I'll give you an example. They don't even have to provide us with any identification. They have to provide us with the Home Office right to work and any immigration status. That's something they do have to declare. But as a matter of course, they don't even have to provide us with any photo ID to get a premises license. So I think in the absence of the minimum statutory, the minimum statutory requirements, I think any step over and above that, we could potentially be open to challenge on that. And actually, what would we do with the information if they gave us an address? All they have to do is provide us with either a registered address or a postal address for correspondence. The status of the address wouldn't actually give you anything that you could use in order to determine the application.
Okay, thank you for that. Perhaps I can just move it on to another point, if I may, Stephanie. We do on occasions get situations where the licensing authority, as a responsible authority, makes representations, but then subsequently has, shall we call it, a negotiation with the applicant. And those representations are fully addressed, sometimes by the applicant, to the extent that the licensing authority then withdraws from the hearing process. In my mind, you could almost link this, I think, with the absence of the police as a responsible authority from certain hearings. In that, in a way, I think it puts the subcommittee in quite a difficult position, actually, in that you can actually have a hearing without any responsible authorities present, and therefore I think the dependence of the subcommittee on both the quality of the report from the licensing team and guidance from the licensing officer, who is the case officer who is present, then becomes very important. Could you comment on that?
Yes. I think it's a valid point, and I think that what you're perhaps missing when there's negotiations, particularly with the licensing authority, because they are kind of they have a more general licensing view. They're not just focused on one objective, like the police would be focused on crime and disorder. ASB might have views on noise and nuisance and that kind of thing, whereas the licensing authority, they do take a much more holistic approach, and they do have a very well-rounded view of the licensing scene to be able to give you that advice. And I think what you might actually be missing is that kind of advisor, that advisor role, which actually shouldn't be coming from the responsible authorities in any case. The responsible authorities are there to present their evidence and perhaps trying to persuade you to a certain outcome with evidence. But what I'd actually discussed with colleagues in Democratic Services before this meeting, and taking your point about having that kind of advisor, and actually something they do in a lot of other boroughs, including Westminster, is to have so on the sitting with you as a committee, you'd have the legal advisor, who would obviously be there to advise you on the points of law, but you could also have a licensing policy advisor, which would be your licensing kind of specialist, who would know the policy and be able to guide you on policy matters. And it's something that they wouldn't be acting as a responsible authority or an interested party. They would be wholly independent from the application being considered, but they would be there to guide you and advise you on those licensing policy considerations with the legal advisor. So I'm not sure whether that is something that you would feel would benefit you and would help you make your decisions, but it's certainly a point for discussion, and it's certainly something we could look at in introducing into the protocol.
Well, Stephanie, I would certainly find that extremely helpful. I would welcome the views of colleagues on this, but I think I would view that as a positive step forward. Councillor Allen.
I think that's a very positive step forward. I mean, Stephanie, I think it might have been before Stephanie's time, but we dealt with a very high profile case where police, camera, lights, action, everybody crammed into a small room, and we had to defer and then come back. By that time, the police, the council, the licensing team had all negotiated with the applicant and decided to not come back. And there was the councillor sitting there with the democratic, and we had to make a decision in the dark because we knew nothing of the deliberations that had gone outside, just the fact that the police and licensing had stepped back. Thankfully, we made the right decision and that place was closed down, and, you know, all to the good. But I do think it could have been dealt with a lot better, and I think the suggestion made now seems very sensible.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other views from members, please? I'm not seeing anything. Oh, Councillor Lavery.
Yeah, I would endorse that. Having an officer alongside you as part of your panel, if you like, who can help and guide you as to policy matters is always useful in addition to the legal advisor, and actually mirrors in some ways what we do in other circumstances, where you will have presenting officers, you will have specialist reports, but you will have other people from the service there who can also guide you as to what might be an appropriate policy response given the policies we have. So I think it's something that should be clearly investigated and could well help certainly you as chairman and the members of the subcommittee.
And I think there's pretty much a parallel for that in planning, isn't there?
And that was the parallel I was kind of.
I thought it probably was.
But
Right.
yes, and it does help us.
Yeah. So if there are no other comments on that, I think that there's an undercurrent of support for that idea, Stephanie. So yeah, I'd like to see that one followed up. A couple of more points, if I can just raise them. We have seen situations where objectors, residents in particular, have submitted evidence in the form of videos and photographs. And sometimes I think there is a concern about the relevance, the admissibility. Actually, I won't go further than that. I mean, sometimes you know, without a detailed explanation of what am I supposed to be looking at here, and believe you me, it's always forthcoming. You know, I do see that as a problem area, and I would be interested, Stephanie, in your views and Ben's in this respect, because on the one hand, you don't want to be seen to be inhibiting the right of objectors and residents to submit evidence, but on the other hand, you know, the relevance of it has got to be clear, in my view.
Yes, absolutely, I agree. And sometimes the quality of what you're being asked to consider is very, very poor. So again, I think I'd like to suggest that is something that the licensing officer deals with at the front end before it makes it into the report, and actually goes back to the person submitting that evidence and actually says, what is this trying to show? What point are you trying to make with this? And actually they would be invited to give us some commentary on that video or on that photographic evidence. And I'd say, you know, mostly when we do get video and photographic evidence, it is accompanied with some sort of narrative about the point that is trying to be made. But sometimes where that's lacking, I think there is certainly scope for the licensing officer to actually do more and get you that that information. And like you say, if it's not forthcoming, we can put a couple of lines in the report and just say that you know, this photo or this video has been provided. However, it's not very clear what it's trying to show. The person submitting it hasn't been forthcoming with any further information, and we just put it and invite the committee to weight it accordingly. So, you know, if it doesn't show you what you know, if it doesn't make a point that is helpful for you to consider an application, then disregard it. Just don't weight it. So that's something that the officers can definitely try to resolve before you even get the report.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, and perhaps almost if we're using the licensing officer as a filter here, you know,
that's what they're there for. That is what they're there for.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a related point, if I can just throw this in, that we have on occasions recently refused to accept evidence which has come in later than the deadline. You know, I do feel very strongly that this is a policy that we need to uphold fairly strongly, because you know, if we're inconsistent in applying that principle of late evidence, we could find ourselves in some difficulty, I think.
The hearing regulations, the actual law guides you in this respect, and it does say that you are allowed to admit late evidence, and as any interested party or responsible authority can present late evidence even up to the morning of the hearing or even at the hearing, but it does have to be agreed with all parties, and it does have to be agreed by you as the committee if that's going to be admitted. So while they've got a statutory right to do that, it doesn't mean that it's automatically considered, and you can bounce it if everyone is in agreement.
Okay, thank you. My final point is probably a very easy one, in that the latest draft of the licensing policy, paragraph 21.3, defines this category of high-risk premises. I sometimes feel that the subcommittee will on occasion have no option but to grant a license. But in so doing, sometimes we walk away with the feeling, well, we've done this, but we know that there is potential risk in this area of this particular license, and to have the ability to get those premises set as a high-risk category probably would be helpful to members of the subcommittee. Can you comment on that?
I think assigning sort of categories to premises is a slightly risky approach, particularly where there may not be evidence. So if it's about the perceived risk or the likelihood of harm, then that is one thing. And what we would probably suggest, that where you felt as members or even as ward members for things happening in your own wards, that where you felt there was a likelihood of harm, you could request that the licensing team, the ASBIT team, undertake a more proactive approach with certain premises, and that might come in the form of out of hours visits, more compliance checks, and that sort of thing, to actually more monitoring of those premises. And I think that's probably the way that we would approach those high risk premises, where we've got proven high risk, and where we've got proven, you know, if we've got crimes happening every other week and we've got noise complaints every other week. I mean, generally that does step up the levels of intervention from the teams as a matter of business as usual anyway. So where we, you know, I mean, you know, we've all kind of been in this world for a while, and we know certain premises, you say, oh, not them again, you know. So we do have those premises that we deal with routinely. But what I'd suggest is that where, and I'd say that this is more your role as a ward member rather than the actual committee. I think the committee is very limited in its scope with actually dealing with just decisions and making those decisions. The follow-up that happens with licenses that may be granted afterwards, you know, is something that can be picked up by by the ward members and the enforcement teams by saying, okay, well, in this premises there's a likelihood of this impact, or the residents were concerned about ABC issues. So for the first year that premises is in operation, we're going to have this approach, and we're going to schedule these visits, and we're going to do 5 out of hours visits, and we're going to do 3 compliance visits, and that's kind of what we would be looking to do. But I suggest that is more your role as ward members than actual committee members.
Thank you. Councillor Oswell, I think you indicated, and then Councillor Allen.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, actually, Stephanie's covered most of what I was going to say. But if sometimes it can come down to local knowledge, can't it? If we think that something is at high risk and we would probably monitor it, are we able to grant a license for, say, a temporary period, say 6 months or 12 months? Because that is a way of monitoring, and you might then get some local knowledge, feedback from ward councillors, and visiting, as you've already covered, you know, and see what you can find out and see what we know. Are we able to do that? A temporary license just to see how they get on. It's almost like
a probationary license.
Yeah, probationary license, if you like. Yeah, that's a nice way to put it, really. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Oswell. The short answer is no, unfortunately. But one of the things, you know, and it's a lot like your driving license. You know, you get your driving license until you're 70 years old. So that's the way. And if you're a bad boy and you muck it up, then they take it away from you, or you get certain endorsements. So you know, the licensing regimes that we're dealing with are very much like that. You get your license up front. It's a very permissive act. It's a very permissive system. And if you're a naughty boy, then we can take it away. That's the very reactive way that the licensing legislation works, and it is just like getting your driving license. So no, unfortunately.
Thank you. Councillor Allen. Councillor Allen, you're on mute, I think.
Oh, there you go. One thing I would like to see is when new licenses are being sought, and especially in, I'm trying to use my words very carefully here, especially in newly developed areas, when we are looking at CCTV and everything else, the licensing team should be looking with a view to giving them an, you know, granting the application, of looking inside the building and outside the building on their curtilage. I hope people understand what I'm saying, because I have a concern that when licenses are being granted, everyone's saying, oh yes, well, they've got CCTV inside the building, but the outside the building, somebody else's problem. And then when it comes to licensing and an appeal comes in, residents scream, it's going on outside. The applicant's saying, well, I've got it inside, but outside is not my concern, when it really is. So I'd like that tightening up. And I don't want to say any more than that, but I do want it noted here that I've said it, because I hope there'll be a discussion outside of this meeting of how it can be remedied. Thank you.
Stephanie, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely appropriate in the right scenario. I think if you're presented with justification to have cameras monitoring the outside area, that will form part of your decision, but it must be justified. So I think if you're presented with a case and the evidence points towards that outcome, yeah, there's no harm with that at all. But I'd be cautious of kind of imposing a blanket policy, because there'll be other situations where it may not be appropriate, or it's not necessary, it's not justified. But I think definitely in the right, with the right application, the right circumstances, with the right justification, yes, it can absolutely be justified.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, we've given the hearing protocols quite a heavy airing. Before I close this down, does anybody have any other points they'd like to make? I'm not seeing anything. Stephanie, thank you for that. I think that's been a very helpful discussion, and hopefully that allows the team to go away and think about one or two new ideas and come back with something before too long. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
We now move to hospitality sector coronavirus regulations. Stephanie, I think this is you again, is it?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The teams have been very, very busy. I also look after the food, health and safety team as well. They deal with health and safety and hygiene, food hygiene, etc. As you can imagine, over the last few months, we've been extremely busy dealing with COVID-related matters and compliance with the COVID regulations across all sectors, but I've just picked on the hospitality ones today because that's the area that's going to be of most interest to yourselves. So the hospitality sector, we're allowed to reopen on the 4th of July. And officers from that date have commenced a rolling programme of interventions and that, you know, giving guidance on the ever-changing regulations that seem to be coming out every 5 minutes from central government on what you can and can't do, how you can do it, how you can keep people safe, how you can keep your staff safe, how you can manage customers, where you've got to put your tables, how you've got to scan people. It's just been a very, very you know, mountainous raft of legislative requirements that hospitality premises have had to adapt and implement in a very short space of time. So we've been helping them with that. So we've made sure that everybody is up to date with all the latest government guidance, which, as I said, seems to change every few weeks at the moment. The most significant changes for the hospitality sector came out mid-September, and I've included some headings in the report for you, starting at page 141. And we now have the rule of 6, which will probably change again by the end of the week, where you can't actually accommodate groups of more than 6 in any hospitality premises. So if you wanted to hold have a birthday gathering and you thought, well, I've got 2 tables of 6 making up 12, the hospitality premises cannot take that booking because you would be looking to circumvent the rule of 6, albeit they'd be seated separately, but they cannot actually take the booking for more than 6 premises, and that's now an offence for which you can get £1,000 fixed penalty notice for. We've also got the track and trace, which I'm sure you've seen, the NHS QR code system, which is everywhere now. It's on every cafe, on every betting shop, on every pub, restaurant, everywhere. Everywhere you might sit down for more than 15 minutes to take part in a service or to buy something or to consume something. So you have to scan in the NHS app when you go into a premises. If you don't have a smartphone or you just don't want to use the government system, then premises are duty bound to have an alternate system and it could be a paper system, it could be their own QR system. And this is really to help with the contact tracing effort by central government. So it can actually say whether an outbreak has been linked to a certain premises. There's additional requirements for hospitality premises. Again, these are all now offences in law, which are subject to £1,000 FPNs, rising up to £10,000 for repeated breaches. So, like I mentioned earlier, to uphold the rule of 6, business premises may not take bookings for parties of more than 6 unless an exemption on gatherings applies. So, for example, you can still have a wedding reception for 15 people, but no dancing and no sort of mingling with the tables. So it's all become very very restricted. And businesses have a duty to ensure that no person in a group of 6 mingles with any other group of 6. So it's actually very difficult for hospitality to manage, but they are doing their best overall. They've also got to make sure that their tables are spaced appropriately, ideally at a distance of 2 meters or less than 2 meters where there's mitigation like screens or like a back-to-back seating arrangement, so that would be acceptable. So these are all sorts of things that the officers have been helping businesses to adhere to, but also enforcing and inspecting if they are not doing that appropriately. So pubs, bars and cafes can only operate on a table service, so there's no more wandering up to the bar, ordering your pint and standing at the bar to drink it. You must be seated, and they must operate table service, and you must remain seated when you're consuming food or drink. So it gets rid of this vertical drinking, standing at the bar, mingling, you know, which is more likely to spread the virus. Face coverings as well, depending on whether you've visited a restaurant, cafe or bar lately. It's now a requirement that you've got to wear face coverings when not seated. So if you're getting up to pop to the loo, or you're getting up to pay your bill, you must wear a face covering, and also you must wear a face covering when you enter and exit and walking to and from your table. So the only time you don't have to wear a face covering is when you're sitting at your table eating your food or drinking your drinks. We now have the 10 o'clock curfew. Again, this is something that may change as we're now entered into this new 3-tier system, and it's something that the government can vary at very, very short notice if the numbers are indicating a certain level. So we've also been doing out of hours checks and enforcing the curfew as well. We have found a few that have chosen to operate outside of that time. Again, they're subject to fixed penalty notices. So we've been carrying out a range of enforcement activities. Obviously, at all the front end, it was very much educating, advising, assisting businesses to comply, and that was very much the approach we took for the first couple of weeks. And now we've kind of moved into more of the enforcement phase, whereby you know, we are prepared to actually enforce and issue those fixed penalty notices. So I just had a look at the numbers this morning. And to date, we've done 510 visits to hospitality over the last sort of 3 weeks, I'd say, which has actually resulted in 140 warnings for breaches. So we're operating a system at the moment where if a breach is spotted by an officer, they get a written warning first before any FPNs are issued. And we are now moving into the revisit phase for those that have had warnings, and if necessary, we will be issuing fixed penalty notices. So it's been a big change and a big shift in terms of what my officers have been doing day to day. It's I don't actually remember what the normal world was like anymore. We're so far away from that now, and it really has all been about COVID and the compliance with these new hospitality regulations. I'll just pick up on the point that was made about shisha earlier. And Daniel got a question about our approach with shisha. I think it was from you, Councillor Allen. We have done an exercise because of the risk with shisha smoking, you know, shared pipes. It tends to be mostly BAME users that frequent shisha premises, and the sort of typical non-compliance issues that we have with only a few of them. It does give rise to concerns for COVID secure measures as well. So we undertook an exercise last week where we visited probably about 12 to 13 of the known shisha premises around the borough, and I'm pleased to say that overall they were more or less compliant with the COVID regulations, and we have sent a warning to a couple. However, we did come across a couple of cases that were completely off our radar, and we are looking at them for you know, sort of tougher sanctions. So I hope to be in a position to update you in a little bit more detail, certainly by the time of the next meeting, on what action we've taken with those. But obviously it's still ongoing at the moment, so I can't share full details with you at the moment, but we'll certainly do so for the next meeting. I think, Councillor Allen, your question was more of a policy question, in that, you know, is there new regulations or is there a new approach we can take? And no, unfortunately not. We still have to approach them with a combination of smoke-free legislation, health and safety, planning, licensing, a bit of health and safety as well. So there is no kind of overarching governance for shisha lounges. We have to use a bit of a mashup of all these regulations, and we are working with planning colleagues in planning enforcement, based on the back of the visits that we did last week, and there's quite a few follow-up actions that planning are interested in taking. So we are it's kind of, I suppose in a way the COVID situation has kind of refreshed our interventions with shisha lounges, and we have undertaken this operation, which we're hoping to lead to some successful enforcement actions.
Thank you, Stephanie. Any questions for Stephanie on the coronavirus regulations?
Just one.
Sorry, Councillor Arnold. I saw
Just
you.
one.
Sorry, Councillor Allen. Councillor Arnold indicated first that you.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Stephanie, you said you visited about 510 premises over the last few weeks. About 140 had warning lessons, which is what, about 25–30%.
Yeah.
If you were to take sort of 10 being super compliant with COVID regulations and 1 being haven't bothered at all, would you say that there are some that are 1s, some that are 10s, or the majority sort of between 4 and 6? What's the breakdown look like?
It probably is. I mean, I'd say, you know, like you say, it's rolling out at about 25% on average at the moment from week to week of the ones that aren't compliant, and that non-compliance maybe the that they haven't got a QR poster up. So and they might get a warning for that. So when we're not talking, you know, sort of really serious and dangerous environments, but it's something that probably I'd say less than 10 we're very concerned about. Of those 140, we've probably got 10 top ones that we've got very sort of serious concerns about. But overall, I think the majority of them, you know, it may, like I said, it may be the failure to put a QR poster in the right position, or it may be that you know, their tables were a bit too close together. But I think the warning, it just serves as a bit of a shot across the bows for them to sort of put things right, and more or less I think we've done some revisits, and on the revisit inspection since they received the warning, they've been compliant, so it has done the trick. But no, I like I say, Councillor Arnold, I think out of that 140, there's probably about 10 that have been really bad. But other than that, they've all been, you know, it's all been kind of minor issues.
Are there any that have been really well? I mean, done exceptionally well?
There's a number that have done very well, and we've actually publicised those in our last issue of Hillingdon People. There was a couple of hair salons, and there was a pub. So that you know, and it will tell you something that 75% of those premises we found no issue at all. So they are the premises that are getting it right, and doing really well. So and like I say, yes, we did publicise very early on. This was before all these hospitality regulations came out, but we did publicise a few of our businesses who were getting it absolutely spot on, and they were kind of congratulated for that in our Hillingdon People edition. So yes, they you know, like I said, the figures say 75% of all premises are getting it absolutely right. So it's not completely bad.
Thank you for that. Councillor Allen.
Most of what I want to say has been said, but I will say we should be congratulating everybody out there in the community for what they're doing to protect themselves, because I've got to be honest, the rules are, you know, on one day from another, nobody knows what the hell's going on. Residents are saying to me, we can go and sit in somewhere, 6 of us, but we mustn't have friends, family circled round us on other tables, but we can have unknowns sitting at the next table. Does this virus take us by postcode? You know, what the hell's going on? I mean, it is quite farcical. So until somebody actually gets their head round it and does something proper, congratulations to all those who are doing something.
Thank you for that. Stephanie, there's one extra point of clarification. This is something else we did cover in my email, please. There was a recent hearing where we had a certain degree of confusion about the jurisdiction of the licensing authority so far as tables situated outside business premises were concerned, and the confusion being obviously to the extent to which they're on public thoroughfares, then we're into the pavement licensing regime, I would imagine. But I think the lack of clarity perhaps was over where the pavement in question is within private property. Can you clarify that for us, please?
Yeah, so as part of the COVID regulations, the government has relaxed the rules on tables and chairs, and now there's this very, very light touch permissive system under the Business and Planning Act, whereby you can get a pavement licence for next to nothing, and it's pretty much a given that you're going to get granted. So the there is crossover, obviously, with our hospitality premises with tables and chairs. I'd say that on private land, we've got no jurisdiction with the placement of those tables and chairs at all. However, if there are licensable activities being conducted in that outside area, then you can control it by way of conditions, curfews, etc. And that's something that we do see fairly typically on, and I'll give you the other example was beer gardens, where you've got use of an outside space, and you clearly don't want people sitting out there till all hours of the morning. If it's in a residential area, it's going to be keeping people up all night. So you can look at the use of those outside areas, consider whether or not they're being used for licensable activities, and consider also whether they're being picked up by other legislation. So if they're being picked up by the business and planning licenses for tables and chairs, just under which is a temporary piece of legislation, will expire next year. Street trading would be our business as usual license for that sort of thing. But yes, you can control it in certain circumstances. But what I would say is that if you've got an outside area that perhaps is on private land and is not being used for licensable activities, you are very restricted in what you're actually able to do.
Thank you for that. Councillor Allen, you wanted to raise something?
Yes, please. Stephanie, you just said that it's almost a given that someone can apply to have tables and chairs outside their premises. And I don't want to give the shopkeepers in Haystown false hope, because we all received a letter from the council saying, and I'm sure other councillors received the same letter, saying, are you happy for tables and chairs to be put out in the town centre? And a number of us councillors who've dealt with some really scary things going on in Haystown at times, and knowing we haven't got enough police to be there 24/7, we said no. And I haven't heard of one premise that didn't have it before get a licence. So it isn't a given. And, I think we should be saying to residents, we have your best interests at heart, because while you might like to have a table and chair, a business might like to have a table and chairs, and we fully understand they're trying to make up their money they've lost, we have to put the residents who live over top those shops and through the town centre, we have to put them at our heart. Thank you.
Chairman, just to say that Councillor Gardner has been having some connection issues with her camera. I've just spoken to her on the phone, so just to be aware that she's not currently in the meeting.
Thank you for that, Mark. I was aware of the gyrations that were taking place on the screen, which were slightly puzzling, but thank you. Stephanie, did you want to comment on Councillor Allen's point?
Yeah, just on the point there, Councillor Allen, of licences are a given. What I'd say is they're more of a given than they ever have been. Whilst that's not 100% guaranteed that they will actually end up with a licence. And what I meant by that statement is that the Business and Planning Act that we now grant tables and chairs under for a temporary period is extremely permissive, and it is there in order to help businesses spread out their customers when they have dining in and drinking in facilities. So while it's not, and this system isn't used for shopfront displays, it's not used for street trading pitches. So we still have the street trading legislation, the London Local Authorities Act of 1990, that takes care of that. But the Business and Planning Act, it does make for a very, very permissive system for businesses to place tables and chairs on the highway to aid social distancing. So, like I said, it's a very temporary piece of legislation. It's a temporary measure, and the date on the legislation, I believe, is something like December or something like that next year. So it will be with us for a little while, but it is temporary, and it is purely there to help hospitality premises spread their customers out so that they can aid social distancing. But you know, any issue with crime, disorder, noise, we do still have the same powers where we can revoke any permission that's been given. So I would say that we do have that safety as a fallback where there are issues identified.
Councillor Allen, any further point from you on that, or no?
No, thank you. I think I'm clear, and I think Stephanie's clear as well.
Thanks very much. Okay. Right, I think again we've given that subject a fairly good airing. Any other questions for Stephanie on the coronavirus regulations? I'm not seeing anything. So Stephanie, thank you for that. If we can then move on, please, to the legislative and industry update. And Glenn Egan, I think this is for you to lead us through this. Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just to say, I've got a voice connection with colleagues. I can't see any faces at all, so forgive me for that. Just a brief report here, Chairman. It's rare that a licensing case gets to the High Court, and particularly one on the public sector equality duty. And this case involving London Borough of Hackney is an interesting illustration of actually how difficult it can be to apply the public sector equality duty to licensing, particularly in a situation like you had in Hackney, where it's difficult to identify which people are affected by licensing changes there. So I think the relevance of that for a future case that comes to Hillingdon is actually where someone is raising the equality issue, is the council discharging its public sector equality duty. The committee can tease that issue out there. Who is affected by this? Why do you say there's an adverse effect on those people? What amelioration is required to address that adverse effect? So I think that it's just useful there as an illustration there of the how difficult it can be to apply to equalities in practice, because particularly where you can't identify particularly groups who are affected, because a decision affects all licensed premises in an area. It's much easier to carry out an equalities impact assessment if it's in relation to particular premises. But also what the High Court was quite clear about is that the public sector equality duty does not trump other duties. So if you have premises where, like here, where the council is looking to give some respite to residents because of noise nuisance late at night, you can't then pray and aid the equalities duty to stop that from happening. I think the other interesting aspect of this case was the costs. It's something that's allowed recently in law that pressure groups or companies can start challenging council decisions, and a number of companies have been set up like this one, where wealthy individuals set up a limited company to bring a case to court in the expectation that if they lost, they wouldn't have to pay Hackney's costs. And
we appear to have lost Glenn's audio then. As he was introducing the report, Chairman, did you want to see if any members have questions?
Yes, I think that's a good idea, Mark.
To defend this. So I think then there's some the interesting lesson here for all licensing authorities is don't be afraid of teasing out the equality issues when it's said that there's the quality issue that's been raised there. So,
Glenn, thank you.
My connection is now going.
Glenn, can you hear us? I think yes. Unfortunately, the quality of the audio was not good, and we did miss you for little segments. But I'm seeing a question from Councillor Allen. Councillor Allen.
It's just an observation, really. We talked earlier about being able to check people who live in the borough, who say they own a property, but they live in the borough and everything else. And we were told we're not allowed to check where they reside. And I think if we were able to check where they reside, this issue that came up in Hackney perhaps wouldn't have arose that way, because the officers would have at their disposal all the names and addresses of the businesses concerned.
Yeah.
I think that's the only observation I'm going to make on this.
Okay. I'm not sure whether Glenn heard that. Possibly not. I think it may have to the comment.
Sounds like it's part of a
Councillor Oswell, hopefully yours is a comment as well. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. No, it's not about that. I've just got a message from Councillor Gardner saying that Councillor Gardner saying she's been shut out of the meeting because her camera keeps turning off, and now she can't get back in. It looks like her Wi-Fi's gone down. So can you apologise for me, please? So that's what I'm doing, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Well,
Chairman, if I may.
Problems. Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman, if I may interject. So Glenn's introduced the report. I think if members have got any questions, we can take them, I can note them down, and we can relay them on to Glenn after the meeting.
Yes, I think that's very wise, because we are clearly having a few problems this morning. With that, let's move on then. So the next item on the agenda is the forward planner, which we're inviting. Very briefly, does anybody have any questions or comments about that?
Chairman, is today's Wednesday, not Thursday the 14th, as listed in the report.
Absolutely correct.
Well,
Chairman, so we've obviously this is to note, but also suggest any future presentations, information topics pertinent to the committee's remit. You'll see in April, subject to whether these meetings are virtual or not, we've sort of provisionally scheduled on that external speaker from Diageo to come in that we'd promised a while back, and also a proper demo of all the seized and counterfeit goods that Trading Standards gets. You can get to actually see them in the flesh, if you like. So if members have got anything else either at this meeting or wish to suggest something via myself or the chairman, which I can liaise with the chairman on in terms of information or presentations, please feel free to do so.
Councillor Dennis, and then Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed that again in the minutes of the last meeting, under section 22, it said that the licensing committee would have an update on the effect of fixed odd betting terminal gambling changes nationally and locally. And as me and the chairman recently, we were preparing for a case to do with gambling machines, bingo gambling machines. This was, but wasn't as simple as are these machines or is this bingo? I personally be quite interested in a sort of update on the law around that and what that looks like, because it's not as clear as you would first think.
I agree. I think that will be extremely helpful.
Noted, Chairman.
Councillor Allen.
Taking into account the forecasts that this pandemic is not going to go away, can I suggest that we ask Diageo if they would prepare a presentation that we can have over the IT system, so that we aren't waiting to the 11th hour and then sorry they can't do it, they can't attend. We'd have it packaged, ready to go, and that gives them plenty of time to actually do a good presentation without rushing it.
Through you, Chairman, absolutely, we can do that if that's going to be the situation at the time.
Yeah, I agree. I'm tempted to venture the opinion that they could all send us some samples to try, but maybe that's a flippant comment. Okay, very good. Well,
I'm not sure that will work, Chairman.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. So I think that brings us to the conclusion of the part one part of the agenda. So we will now move into the private part of the meeting to ratify some minutes of the subcommittee hearings. So will councillors please stand by and remain on mute until the live broadcast has ended. And thank you for those who have been watching on YouTube.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just now going to stop the broadcast, so bear with me, councillors.